Just where you started with your PhD. What was your PhD about? The year.
Yeah, it was around about 88 that I had the concept that I'd like to do applied pharmacokinetics as well as study the cardiovascular effects of propofol and alfentanil for total intravenous anesthesia. And in order to do that, first of all, I had to develop a method for measuring propofol blood concentrations, which I did with the aid of the Department of Pharmacology, using an HPLC. And I also had to write a computer program that could do target-controlled infusions, which was an extremely complicated algorithm, which is quite different from the simple algorithm that was developed by Steve Schaefer, which I then later adopted. So what we did was, Andre Coetzee and I first started off with propofol, and we did target-controlled infusions to pigs, aiming at a certain plasma concentration, and once steady state had been reached, we measured the concentrations, took blood, and measured the variables that, like the EES, for determining myocardial contractility. And then we'd go up another step, increase the concentration, and so we, step by step, we would increase the concentrations of propofol, and we then subsequently published it, and we demonstrated that propofol has a threshold at which it depresses the myocardium. But what was interesting about that too was that there was a hysteresis, that when you allowed the propofol concentrations to decrease, the myocardium didn't recover, not during that experiment. And in retrospect, I wonder if that wasn't an early manifestation of the propofol infusion syndrome. Yeah. So that was my PhD, and it helped me to develop a lot of skills with regard to pharmacokinetics and target control infusions, etc. Also, at the time, we were speaking about Carl Lombard, who's still with, who helps you guys out a lot.
Yeah.
I went to him for advice, and at that time, would you believe it, there was hardly any computer software for PCs to do statistics. And for my PhD, I had to do repeated analysis of variance, but non-parametric. And there was no software that existed to do that. So Carl gave me a reprint out of a journal for an algorithm to do that. And I had to write my own program in Pascal to do repeated measures analysis of variance. And that's where I developed my interest in statistics.
So going back to the HPs, where did I study them before you started that?
Yeah, interesting.
I studied humans, and we measured propofol concentrations, but using our own HPs.
Yeah.
And alfentanil, we could measure both.
Yeah, you could do that if you used gas chromatography. If you had to measure quite high concentrations, which obviously you were doing.
Yeah.
But in a pharmacokinetic study, you would need to be able to measure very low concentrations as well.
Right.
To get that decrease.
Yeah.
So we needed to do HPLC.
So when did you actually get your PhD?
I can't remember. It was in the early 1990s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your research after that?
Yeah, I just went on from there. I then got AstraZeneca
Yeah.
had then taken over Propofol.
Yeah.
And the then director, the Scots guy,
John Glenn.
Ian Glenn.
Ian Glenn.
Ian Glenn was very keen to they'd already developed the dip diffuser system.
Yeah.
But then their problem was, what pharmacokinetic model do they put in there?
Yeah.
So I was at a congress at the time, and we chatted about this. I said, well, okay, if you provide the funds, I'll do a study for you. So that was an extremely exciting time, because I'd already developed the ability to measure propofol, and we then worked out a protocol whereby I would test 3 different pharmacokinetic models and see how well they predicted the real plasma concentrations.
Yeah.
And as a result of that study, the now famous Marsh model was selected by AstraZeneca to be the...
So that was your
that was
work?
my study, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Was
I
that
published it in anesthesiology.
Yes. And was that accredited at the time? Because
No.
you know, Kevin Kenny seemed to be the big name that
Yeah.
was taking all the kudos.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. That data is still out there on the internet for anybody to use.
Yeah.
We did, and I measured arterial and venous concentrations. It was a huge study. We did measured over 700 blood samples.
Yeah.
And I also showed that the right thing to do was to measure arterial blood samples and not venous blood samples.
At that time, I recall you had many collaborators. The same names always popped up. You were always talking about, I think, Peter Glass,
That's right.
Stephen Schaefer.
Mm.
You had Michael Strace. You started doing Michel Strace.
Yeah. Mm.
Started doing work with him and
Mm.
other people in Europe. I know Ian Glenn. I've once
Yeah.
met him in a taxi,
Mm.
in a cab, but he was sending his regards to you. So obviously,
Yeah, and guys in America like Talmadge Egan, and so on, yeah. Thomas Schneider, we became great pals of the Schneider model for propofol.
And then you got into into developing a model for...
Yeah, by that time, models were appearing in the literature.
Yeah.
And interestingly, a guy turned up in my office from the engineering department, a guy called Ralph Pina, one day, and he said, he's looking for projects. So I said, I've got a project for you. We're going to write. I'd already had some experience with my PhD of controlling infusion pumps by a computer.
Yeah.
So I said, we're going to write some decent software. We're going to write a program called Stealth Pump. Now, Steve Schaefer's program called Stand Pump already existed, but there were no graphics, and it was somewhat user unfriendly.
Yeah.
So I said, we're going to write a program called Stealth Pump,
Yeah.
and we're going to have nice graphics. So Ralph Pinnar sat down and he did some heavy programming.
He was an engineering student.
He was an engineer,
Engineer,
qualified
right.
engineer,
Okay.
yeah. Electronics.
Okay.
And I don't know if you ever had experience with Stealth Pump, but it controlled an infusion pump, and it could do TCI, targeting both the effect site
Yeah.
as well as the plasma concentration. So it was the poor man's dip diffuser, except you could infuse infuse a number of drugs. This was the whole idea. Because the dip diffuser came out, it was one drug with one model,
Yeah.
and that was that.
Yeah.
But as an academic anesthesiologist and other academic anesthesiologists who want to get involved in this new technique of doing TCI and TIVA and all that, you need to be able to use different drugs and experiment with different pharmacokinetic models. So that was the whole idea of creating Stealth Pump and I put it out for free
Yeah.
on the internet. Actually, I first sent it to Steve Schaefer and said, look, in case you get cross that I'm cribbing you,
Yeah.
here's the software that we developed, and I've called it, I didn't have a name
Yeah.
for it, actually.
Yeah.
And I said, here's the software, have a look at it, and tell me what you think. And I'm not trying to crib you, I'm trying to improve on what you've done.
Yeah.
And Steve was delighted.
Oh, really?
So he said, why don't you call it Stealth Pump?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he then put it up on the Stanford University website
Yeah.
to be downloaded by anybody.
Yeah.
And that was terribly exciting because people from all over the world were downloading Stealth Pump
Yeah.
and doing TCI, and it could control various pumps. It could control Graysby pumps. It could control the French at that time. I forget now.
Yeah.
But there were at least 4 pumps that it could control. So the guys had a big choice of pumps they could use.
Just excuse me. Just as it coming out.